My son changed the locks while I was at chemo. I stood on the porch I built in 1987, key that no longer fit in my hand, February wind cutting through my thin wool coat. The door opened 6 inches. Chain caught. Derek's face appeared in the gap, smug. "This is my house now, old man. Deal with it." Derek closed the door. I pulled a napkin from my pocket, wrote 2 words, slid it under the door. Then I walked into the snow. Please subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you and what time is it there? I read them all. My name is Henry Callahan. I'm 67 years old, and I built half the West Loop with my own hands. That's not pride. That's 40 years of frozen fingers and 18-hour days. Mortgage payments that made my wife cry. Deals that fell apart at the last minute. The kind of fact you earn through decades of work that sits in your bones alongside the arthritis and the cancer cells multiplying in my lymph nodes. But before all that, before the Brownstone and the company and the betrayal that taught me everything I needed to know about protecting what's mine, I was a 19-year-old carpenter working Chicago winters with nothing but ambition and the memory of my grandfather's voice telling me about the stars over Galway. February 1977. The site on Randolph Street. Wind that cut through canvas like it wasn't there. My fingers went numb inside, gloves stiff with frost. The foreman was a man named Pete Kowalski, 53 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand from a saw accident in '68. He watched me frame a wall that morning, watched me measure twice before each cut, watched me check the level 3 times when once would have satisfied anyone else. "You're slow," he said. "I'm right," I told him. Pete walked away. The next morning, he put me on the finish crew. That's how I learned to build. Not from books or classrooms or the business degree I'd later pay for Derek to squander. I learned from men like Pete, who'd lost pieces of themselves to the work and kept coming back anyway. I learned that quality outlasts shortcuts. I learned that the foundation determines everything that follows. I learned that some lessons cost more than others. Margaret Callahan, my wife of 48 years, was 20 when I married her. I was 20 myself, working 6 days a week and saving every dollar that didn't go to rent or food. She worked at a bakery on Division Street, came home smelling like sugar and yeast, and never once complained about the apartment so small we could touch opposite walls with our arms spread. We got married at St. Michael's on a Tuesday afternoon because I couldn't afford to take Saturday off. Her dress was borrowed from her cousin. My suit came from a thrift shop on Milwaukee Avenue. Father Donovan pronounced us man and wife while snow fell past the stained glass windows, and I remember thinking, this woman deserved better than anything I could give her. I spent the next 48 years trying to prove myself wrong. Job sites across the city. Foremen who taught me. Foremen who tried to cheat me. Foremen who recognized something in the way I worked and gave me opportunities I hadn't earned yet. I moved from carpenter to crew lead to site supervisor by the time I was 30. Maggie kept the books in those years, sitting at our kitchen table with ledgers and receipts spread around her, while I collapsed into bed still wearing sawdust in my hair. Derek, my son, came in 1982. I was in the delivery room, 24 years old and terrified, watching this red-faced, screaming thing emerge into the world and feeling my entire understanding of responsibility shift on its axis. "I'm going to give you everything," I told him that first night. "Every advantage I never had. Every opportunity your mother and I had to fight for. You'll never know what it means to be cold and hungry and scared." I meant it. God help me, I meant every word. The business started small. A warehouse on Fulton Street that everyone else saw as condemned and I saw as potential. I scraped together a down payment from 5 years of savings and a loan from Maggie's father that I paid back with interest before Derek's 2nd birthday. 6 months of work with a crew of 4 men I'd known from the union. And that warehouse became 8 residential units that sold before the paint dried. Callahan Development. The name felt presumptuous at first, like I was claiming something that hadn't been earned. But Maggie said it sounded right. She said it sounded like exactly what we were building. By 1985, we had 3 buildings completed and 2 more in development. The West Loop was still rough then, meatpacking plants and industrial decay, but I could see what it would become. I'd walk those streets at dawn and picture restaurants where loading docks stood, galleries in abandoned warehouses, young professionals paying premium prices for exposed brick and original hardwood floors. I was right about everything except the one thing that mattered. Michael Brennan, my first real partner. We met on a construction site in '82, and I thought I recognized something in him. The same hunger I'd felt at 19, the same willingness to work when others quit. I brought him into the company in '84, gave him 20% equity and access to the operating accounts. In July of 1986, I came into the office on a Monday morning and found the safe empty and Michael gone. $180,000. Every dollar of our operating capital. The mortgage payments, the contractor deposits, the payroll for 23 employees. I spent the next 18 months working around the clock to save what I'd built. I refinanced our apartment. I sold Maggie's car and my tools and anything else that wasn't nailed down. I took jobs I'd normally delegate and finished them myself, working until midnight and starting again at 5. My father died that October. Heart attack at 67, the same age I am now. The funeral was on a Thursday, and I had a closing scheduled for Friday morning that couldn't be moved. A deal worth $300,000, enough to cover 2 mortgage payments and keep the company alive another quarter. I signed the papers while they lowered him into the ground. I'll never forgive myself for that, but I saved the company. I kept my employees working. I kept the promises I'd made to investors and contractors and bankers who'd trusted me with their money. And I learned something that changed everything. Samuel Torres, the attorney who would draft my trust and become one of my most trusted allies, was 29 years old in early 1988, working out of a converted storefront on Halsted Street. I hired him to draft the paperwork for a property transaction, and we ended up talking for 3 hours about trusts and corporate structures and ways to protect assets from every conceivable threat. I want something that can't be broken, I told him. Something that survives me, survives anyone I bring into the company, survives my own family if it comes to that. Samuel didn't flinch. He didn't lecture me about trust or family bonds or the importance of optimism. He just nodded and pulled out a legal pad and started writing. The Callahan Family Trust took 6 months to draft. 47 pages of provisions and conditions, clauses nested inside. Clauses, failsafes that wouldn't activate unless specific triggers were met. Section 4, subsection C. C-covered situations I couldn't imagine ever needing. Grounds for transfer of assets, including physical neglect, financial exploitation, and removal of the grantor from primary residence without written consent. I signed the final documents in Samuel's office on a December afternoon. Snow was falling outside. Maggie was home with Derek, who was 9 years old and already showing signs of the entitlement that would consume him. I signed each page and breathed out. 47 pages between me and the next Michael Brennan. Never again. The Brownstone came the following year. Lincoln Park, 4 stories, built in 1891 and neglected for decades. The previous owner had died intestate, and the property had languished in probate until the price dropped low enough for me to afford it. 5 years restoring that brownstone. 3,000 hours. Every room, every molding, every inch of the wrought iron fence, I forged myself in a metalworking shop on Ashland Avenue. Maggie picked the paint colors and the light fixtures and the tile patterns for the bathrooms. His friends have pool tables, Derek said. We have sawdust. The rooftop observatory was my idea. A small, enclosed deck with retractable panels and mounting hardware for the telescope I bought with my first major development profit. A Celestron CPC 1100 that could resolve Jupiter's moons and Saturn's rings, and the Orion Nebula where new stars are born. My grandfather used to tell me about watching the sky from Galway. The same constellations, the same light traveling millions of years to reach his eyes and then mine. On clear nights, when the city's glow didn't drown out everything, I'd climb to that observatory and find Orion rising in the east. The same hunter my grandfather watched, the same stars. It made everything else feel appropriately small. Derek graduated from high school in 2000. His grades were middling, propped up by tutors Maggie insisted we hire, and extra credit opportunities his teachers reluctantly provided. He wanted to attend Northwestern, and I made calls to people who owed me favors. He wanted a car for graduation, and I bought him a BMW that cost more than my first 3 years of salary combined. Every advantage, every opportunity, everything I'd promised him in that delivery room 18 years earlier. He graduated from Northwestern's business school in 2006, again with help I arranged and tutors Maggie found. He expected a corner office at Callahan Development. I made him start in property management. You want to run this company someday, I told him. First, you learn what the company does. He never forgave me for that either. The years accumulated. Buildings completed, deals closed, the West Loop transforming into exactly what I'd pictured 3 decades earlier. Derek rose through positions I created for him, managing properties he'd never learned to maintain, overseeing employees who reported his failures to me in careful, diplomatic language. I should have listened. I should have acted. But Maggie counseled patience. She saw something in Derek that I couldn't see. Or maybe she just hoped harder than I did. He'll mature, she said. Give him time. Give him responsibility. Give him the chance to grow into the man we raised him to be. I wanted to believe her. So I did. My daughter-in-law, who would become my son's wife within the year, arrived in 2008, meeting Derek at a charity function I'd pressured him to attend. She was sharp in ways I didn't trust, her eyes cataloging the room's worth before she'd finished her first glass of champagne. But Derek was smitten, and Maggie said we should support his choices, and I watched them marry in a ceremony that cost more than my first house. The wedding gift was a check for $50,000. Vanessa deposited it before the reception ended. 2 years ago, Maggie started losing weight. Small amounts at first, easy to explain away. Then larger amounts. Then the tests and the scans and the diagnosis that destroyed everything. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. I stepped back from the company entirely. Derek took over daily operations, while I sat beside Maggie's bed and held her hand and watched the woman who'd believed in me for 48 years slip away in pieces. She died 8 months ago. In our bedroom, in the bed we'd shared for 30 years, surrounded by photographs of the life we'd built together. The nurse stepped out. Maggie gripped my hand. Watch him, Henry. He's not the boy we raised anymore. I should have listened. 3 weeks after the funeral, Derek and Vanessa proposed moving in to the Brownstone's 3rd floor. To help with Dad's care, they said. To make sure he's not alone in that big house. I said yes. The house felt empty without Maggie. Every room held her absence. Every corner reminded me of what I'd lost. I welcomed my son and his wife into my home because I couldn't bear the silence. I didn't see the vultures until their claws were already in deep. 3 months after Maggie died, my oncologist delivered news I'd been expecting. Stage 2 lymphoma. Treatable, he said. Aggressive chemotherapy required, but treatable. I told Derek that evening. Sat him down in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Maggie used to make Sunday dinners for the whole family. I explained the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the months ahead. My son listened without expression. Then he asked his only question. Have you updated your will? I looked at him across the kitchen table. His soft hands that had never held a hammer. His eyes that calculated value without understanding cost. His face that had somehow become a stranger's face, wearing my son's features. 5 words. Maggie had warned me. She was right. 6 months before Derek changed the locks, the erosion began. 3 weeks after they moved in, Derek and Vanessa had agreed to the 3rd floor. 2 bedrooms, a sitting room, their own bathroom. Plenty of space for a couple with a teenage daughter. But by the end of September, their belongings had spread through the Brownstone like a slow tide. Vanessa left her yoga mat in the 2nd floor hallway. Derek's briefcase took up residence on the kitchen counter. Their coats hung in the front closet, pushing mine to the back corner. Small incursions, the kind you notice but don't mention, because mentioning them makes you the difficult one. I noticed. The driving conversation happened on a Tuesday morning. I'd scraped a bumper in the hospital parking garage the day before. A minor thing. Paint transfer on the concrete pillar, barely visible on my Lexus. I'd been dizzy from the chemo, misjudged the turn. Dad, we need to talk about the car. Derek sat across from me at the kitchen table. Vanessa stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching. You could have hurt someone, Derek said. What if you'd hit another car? What if there'd been a pedestrian? It was a parking garage, moving at 2 miles per hour. Vanessa's voice dropped, the kind of quiet people use in hospitals. The point is, you're not as sharp as you used to be. The treatments are taking a toll. I looked at my son, my daughter-in-law, both wearing expressions of practiced worry. I've been driving for 50 years, I said. And now you're 67 with cancer. Derek leaned forward. Dad, this isn't an attack. We're worried about you. I kept my face neutral. I'd learned that expression in 40 years of business negotiations. The one that gave nothing away while my mind cataloged every detail. I'll be more careful, I said. Derek exchanged a look with Vanessa. The kind of look that said they'd discussed this beforehand. Decided on their approach. Maybe we should hold on to the keys, Vanessa said. Just for now. Just until you're feeling stronger. I stood up from the table. My coffee sat untouched, going cold. No. I walked out of the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Derek's voice, low and frustrated. This is exactly what Dr. Peterson warned us about. There was no Dr. Peterson. My oncologist was named Reeves, but they'd planted a seed. A fictional doctor expressing fictional concerns about my mental state. The reorganization of my study happened the following week. I came home from a Thursday chemo session to find Vanessa in my office, with cardboard boxes spread across the floor. My filing cabinets stood open. Papers covered my desk in disordered stacks. What are you doing? She looked up with that practiced smile. The one that never touched her eyes. I thought I'd help organize things in here. You've been so tired lately, and some of these files go back decades. I stepped into the room. My room. The room where I'd worked for 30 years, where every document had a place, where I could find any piece of paper from the last 4 decades within 60 seconds. I don't need help organizing. Henry. She used my first name. Not Dad. Not even Mr. Callahan. Henry, like I was a difficult patient at a nursing home. Some of these folders are falling apart. I'm just putting things in better order. I picked up the nearest box. Inside, I saw trust documents mixed with property records, mixed with old tax returns. Years of careful categorization destroyed. Put everything back, I said. I'm almost done. Put everything back. Her smile flickered. Something harder showed through for a moment. Then the mask returned. Of course, whatever you want. I was only trying to help. She left the boxes where they sat. I spent the next 4 hours putting my files back in order. Some documents were missing. I searched every box, every cabinet, every surface. The original Callahan family trust. Gone. I drove to Samuel's office the next morning. Samuel Torres, my attorney of 36 years now, looked up from his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose. They moved your files? Reorganized. I sat in the leather chair across from him. The same chair where I'd signed the trust 30 years ago. I need copies of everything. The trust, the amendments, Maggie's provisions. Samuel nodded slowly. He'd known me long enough to read between the lines. You think they took something specific? I think I want backup copies in a location they can't access. He reached for his phone. Margaret called me last year. Did you know that? I looked at him. No. She wanted to add some provisions to her own documents. Things that would only activate under certain conditions. Samuel met my eyes. She was worried, Henry, about what might happen after she was gone. I sat with that information. Maggie, even while dying, had been planning for this, protecting me from our own son. Show me everything, I said. The dinner party started in October. I'd come down from the observatory one evening, tired from an hour of tracking Jupiter across the sky, and heard laughter from the formal dining room. The dining room I'd built with my own hands. The room where Maggie and I had hosted Thanksgivings and Christmases and Sunday dinners for 3 decades. The door was closed. Through it, I heard Derek's voice. My business partners from the original West Loop development days. Names I recognized. I stood in the hallway, my own hallway, listening to my son entertain people in my house without telling me, without inviting me, without even mentioning that guests would be present. I went to the kitchen. The refrigerator held the remains of a catered meal. Beef Wellington, imported cheeses, a $70 bottle of wine with 1 glass poured. My dinner sat on the counter. A plate covered with plastic wrap. Leftover chicken, cold rice, wilted salad. I ate standing at the sink. The pattern repeated twice more that month. I learned to recognize the signs. Vanessa's car in the driveway. The clatter of preparation from the dining room. Voices raised in conversation that went quiet when I passed the door. One evening, I paused outside the dining room. The door stood slightly ajar. Where's your father tonight? A woman's voice. One of the wives. Dad's not feeling well. Derek's response came smooth and practiced. The treatments take a lot out of him. He prefers to rest in the evenings. Such a shame. Another voice. Male. I remember Henry from the Fulton Street project. Sharp as a tack. Well, Derek's tone shifted. That was a long time ago. He's had some memory issues lately. Confusion. Wanders at night sometimes. The doctors say it's common at his age, especially with everything else. I walked away. I didn't need to hear more. Emma started coming to my room in late October. Emma, my granddaughter. 16 years old. She had Maggie's eyes. The same quiet intelligence. The same way of watching before speaking. The first time, she knocked on my bedroom door at 9 in the evening. I was reading in the chair they'd relocated from the living room. The chair that had sat by the front window for 40 years, now crammed into a corner of my bedroom because Vanessa said it clashed with the new furniture. Grandpa? I looked up. Emma stood in the doorway, uncertain. Come in? She sat on the edge of my bed, looked around at the cramped space, the desk they'd moved from my study. The boxes of photographs Vanessa had decided were taking up too much room. Your room used to be bigger, Emma said. It's fine. No. She shook her head. It's not. I set down my book. What's on your mind? I heard them talking about you. At dinner last week. Saying you're confused. That you forget things. I waited. You don't forget things, Emma said. You remember everything. You told me about every constellation we can see from the roof. You remember the exact day you met Grandma. I smiled. First time in weeks that expression had felt genuine. Not everyone wants to hear what I remember. Emma leaned forward. Why don't you fight back? They're taking everything. Your office, your chair, your house. Why do you just let them? I looked at my granddaughter. This girl who'd inherited her grandmother's perception along with her eyes. Because I'm waiting, I said. For what? For them to show me exactly who they are. A pause. I need to know how far they'll go. What they're willing to do. I gestured toward the door, toward the rest of the house. Once I know that, I'll know what I'm dealing with. Emma absorbed this. So you're not giving up. I'm documenting. I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook. The pages were filled with my handwriting. Dates, times, incidents. Everything they do, I said. Everything they say. Names of witnesses. Amounts of money. Conversations I overhear. Emma took the notebook, flipped through pages. This goes back months, to the week they moved in. She looked at me differently then. Her shoulders straightened. She handed back the notebook like it was evidence. You've been planning the whole time. I've been watching. Planning comes later. When I have enough information to plan correctly. Emma handed back the notebook. Can I help? You're helping now. Just by being here. Just by noticing. She visited 3 more times that week. We'd climb to the observatory together. I'd show her Orion rising in the east, the same stars my grandfather watched from Galway. She'd ask questions about her grandmother, about the company, about the man her father used to be, or the man I'd hoped he might become. I'm sorry, Emma said one night, looking through the telescope at Saturn's rings. For what? For them. My parents. She pulled back from the eyepiece. They weren't always like this. At least, I don't think they were. People show you who they are when they want something, I said. Your father wants my money. He's wanted it for years. Now he thinks I'm weak enough to take it. Are you? I looked at my granddaughter. The cold November wind cut across the rooftop. No, I said. I'm not. The thermostat changed in mid-November. I woke one morning to a bedroom that felt like a refrigerator. My breath fogged in the air. The digital display on my alarm clock read 58 degrees. I went downstairs. Derek sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. Something's wrong with the heating, I said. He didn't look up. We adjusted the thermostat. Energy costs are through the roof. It's November in Chicago. 62 degrees is perfectly comfortable. Derek typed something on his laptop. Wear a sweater. I walked to the hallway thermostat. I pressed my palm against the cold display. 62 degrees as the maximum setting. Derek had changed the access code. I'm on chemotherapy, I said. My immune system is compromised. The cold, Dad. Derek finally looked at me. His expression was patient, the way you'd speak to a child. You're always complaining about something. First, the car, then the study, now the heating. We're all making adjustments here. You're making adjustments to my house. Our house. The correction came quick. We live here too. I went back to my room. Put on a sweater. Then a second one. Then the wool coat I wore to chemo appointments. The cold sat in my joints like wet concrete. My breath didn't fog, but almost. The cold stayed. The $40,000 disappeared in late November. Derek came to me with the proposal on a Sunday afternoon. A business opportunity, a property in Humboldt Park. Quick turnaround, 90-day loan. He'd pay me back with interest. I'd heard pitches like this for 40 years. I knew what they sounded like when they were real and when they were desperate. This one was desperate. I gave him the check anyway. 3 months passed. No repayment, no mention of the property. When I asked about it, Derek changed the subject. I added the amount to my notebook. $40,000. November 23rd. No documentation. No promissory note. The bank account changes happened in December. Vanessa sat me down one evening after chemo. The treatment had left me hollowed out. My hands shook signing the forms. "We should add me to your accounts," she said. Her voice was honey and concern. "In case something happens during one of your treatments. In case you're hospitalized and bills need to be paid." I should have said no. I knew I should say no, but I was tired, so tired. And she had that look, the reasonable one, the one that made refusing seem paranoid. I signed the forms. Over the next 2 months, I watched the account statements. Withdrawals appeared in patterns. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, always in cash. Always when Derek seemed particularly stressed. I'd seen this pattern before, 20 years ago. An employee named Thompson, who'd been skimming from petty cash. The same rhythm of stress and relief. Agitation before a withdrawal. Calm after. Thompson lasted 8 months before I caught him. Derek was sloppier. Derek was gambling, losing, using my money to cover his debts. I added each withdrawal to the notebook. Dates, amounts, running total. $15,000 in 2 months. The Lakeside Manor phone call happened in early February. I was coming down from the observatory, moving slowly on the narrow stairs. My joints ached from the cold they kept the house at. My stamina wasn't what it had been 6 months ago. Vanessa's voice drifted up from the second-floor landing. She was on her phone, speaking in that low, excited tone she used when planning something she didn't want overheard. "Lakeside Manor has openings." Her voice carried through the stairwell. "Yes, I checked. 2-star rating, but it's cheap. Semi-private rooms," she laughed. "He won't know the difference." I stopped on the stairs, pressed myself against the wall. "By spring, definitely. Once we have power of attorney, it's just paperwork. His doctor will sign whatever we put in front of him." Silence. She was listening to whoever was on the other end. "No, Emma's not a problem. She doesn't have any legal standing. By the time she's 18, he'll be dead or too far gone to care." I heard her footsteps moving away, but door closing. I stood on those stairs until my knees ached, until I heard her footsteps move away, until I was certain. Clarity. I researched Lakeside Manor that night. Multiple citations for inadequate care. Understaffed shifts. Residents found in soiled bedding. One wrongful death lawsuit settled out of court. This was where my son planned to send me. This was the ending he'd chosen for the man who built everything he was trying to steal. I added it to the notebook. Lakeside Manor, February 7th. Phone call overheard. Vanessa's voice. 2-star rating, but it's cheap. The power of attorney documents arrived on February 10th. Derek presented them at breakfast. A manila folder, professionally prepared. Tabs indicating where I needed to sign. "Just a formality, Dad." He slid the folder across the table. "For your protection, in case you're incapacitated during treatment." I opened the folder. Read each page. The documents would give Derek complete control over my finances, my properties, my medical decisions. They would make him my legal guardian in all but name. Vanessa watched from the doorway. Her expression was eager, hungry. I closed the folder. "No," I said. Derek's jaw tightened. The patient mask slipped. "Dad, be reasonable. I'm being very reasonable." "You're not thinking clearly," the doctor said. I stood up from the table, picked up the folder. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I know exactly what you're doing." I set the folder back on the table. Unsigned. I walked out of the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Vanessa's sharp whisper. "We need to move faster. He's going to ruin everything." I climbed the stairs to my room, closed the door, opened my leather notebook. Power of attorney documents, presented February 10th. Refused signature. Derek's response indicated urgency. Vanessa's comment, "We need to move faster. He's going to ruin everything." I set down the pen. They'd shown me who they were. Now I knew what I was dealing with. The planning could begin. The hospital volunteer kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You should get inside quick, Mr. Callahan." He pulled to the curb in front of my Brownstone. "Wind chill warning tonight. They're saying -15. I nodded. My hands shook against my thighs. The chemo had hollowed me out this session, left my stomach churning and my bones feeling like wet sand. 4 hours in that vinyl chair, while poison dripped into my veins. 4 hours of watching the clock and thinking about what waited at home. The Brownstone stood dark against the gray February sky. Snow fell steadily since noon, accumulating on the limestone steps, frosting the wrought iron fence I'd forged 40 years ago. My house. My life's work. Every brick and beam and piece of trim touched by my hands. Thank you. I opened the car door. The cold hit me like a wall. My lungs seized. My eyes watered. -15 wind chill, and I was wearing a wool coat meant for October. "You need help getting to the door." "No, I'm fine." I wasn't fine. But some things a man does alone. He waited at the curb while I climbed the steps. Each one required concentration. My left knee ached. My right hip protested. The chemo had stripped away whatever reserves I'd built up over 67 years, leaving me fragile as old newspaper. I reached the top step and fumbled for my keys. Found them in my coat pocket. Fitted the brass key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Pushed harder. The key slid in, but wouldn't rotate. Something blocked it from the inside. A new deadbolt. Brass. Expensive. Not there this morning when I left for treatment. I pressed my palm against the frosted glass of the door. Through it, I saw a shape. A shadow standing in my hallway, watching me struggle. Derek. I knocked. 3 raps, the way I'd opened this door for 35 years. The shadow moved. The door opened 6 inches. A security chain caught, blocking entry. My son's face appeared in the gap. The corner of his mouth lifted. His eyes stayed flat. "This is my house now, old man. Deal with it." The words landed flat, rehearsed. He'd been practicing this moment. "Derek, it's 15 below." Behind him, Vanessa appeared. My daughter-in-law. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never had. "We filed the power of attorney this morning." Her voice was honey and venom. "Your signature or not, a judge will grant it. You're clearly not competent to manage your affairs." I stared at her through the 6-inch gap. This woman who'd eaten at my table, slept under my roof, called me dad when she wanted something. I didn't sign any power of attorney. Vanessa's smile widened. "You did, actually. 3 witnesses, a notary. All very official. The forged documents. The ones I'd refused to sign 2 weeks ago. They'd done it anyway." The wind cut through my coat. I felt it in my spine, in my weakened immune system, in the cancer cells still multiplying, despite the poison I'd just pumped through my veins. Standing out here could kill me. Derek knew that. Vanessa knew that. Where am I supposed to go? Derek shrugged. One shoulder, casual, the way he'd shrugged off responsibility his entire life. "Lakeside Manor has a bed." I called ahead, Lakeside Manor. The 2-star nursing home with citations for inadequate care. The place where residents were found in soiled bedding. The place Vanessa had researched because it was cheap. My son had reserved a spot for me. While I sat in a chair getting chemotherapy, he'd called a warehouse for the dying and booked me a room. The door closed. I stood on the porch. My porch. The porch I'd rebuilt in 1987, replacing rotted boards, reinforcing the joists, sanding and staining until the wood gleamed. I'd held Maggie's hand on this porch 1,000 times. Watched Derek ride his first bicycle down this sidewalk. Carried Emma up these steps when she was 3 years old and fell asleep in my arms. The cold seeped through my coat, through my sweater, through my skin. It settled in my bones like concrete setting. The volunteer's car pulled away from the curb. He'd seen the door open, assumed I was inside. I looked down at my hands, red and chapped, shaking from cold and chemo and something else I couldn't name yet. The wrought iron fence gleamed under the streetlights. I'd spent 3 weeks in that metalworking shop on Ashland Avenue, heating and hammering and shaping each piece. The scrollwork at the top, the spear points, the gate that swung smooth on hinges I'd welded myself. 40 years of work. 40 years of building and planning and preparing for every contingency I could imagine. I'd imagined this one. I stopped shaking. My breathing steadied. I looked at the fence I'd forged and saw the plan clearly. The same feeling I'd had the night before. I fired my first foreman for stealing. The same clarity I'd felt when Michael Brennan emptied my safe and I realized I had to save the company alone. Maggie's voice came back to me. A conversation from years ago, one of our rare arguments about my obsessive planning. You can't blueprint a life, Henry. Maybe not, but you can blueprint an exit strategy. I reached into my coat pocket, found a pen, found a crumpled napkin from the hospital cafeteria. The paper was soft, wrinkled, barely holding together. I smoothed it against my thigh, clicked the pen. My fingers were numb. The ink should have frozen. But I wrote 2 words in steady blue letters. Check, trust. I knelt on the porch. My knees cracked. Pain shot through my hip. I didn't care. I slid the napkin under the door, watched it disappear into the warm light of my own house. Then I stood, straightened my coat, walked down the steps I'd rebuilt 37 years ago. The diner sat 3 blocks away, corner of Armitage and Sheffield. Open 24 hours, coffee that tasted like motor oil, booths with cracked vinyl seats. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of burnt coffee and frying grease hit me when I pushed through the door. I'd eaten there 100 times during the Brownstone renovation, grabbing breakfast at 5 in the morning before the crews arrived. I walked. The wind tore at my coat. Snow stung my eyes. My feet went numb in the first block. My hands stopped shaking because they'd stopped feeling anything at all. 3 blocks, maybe 400 yards. It felt like miles. The diner's door chimed when I pushed through. Heat washed over me. My lungs unlocked. My eyes watered from the sudden warmth. A waitress looked up from the counter. 60 years old. Name tag said Maria. She'd been working here since the 90s. Lord, honey, you look half dead. I sat in the nearest booth. My whole body trembled. Not from cold anymore, from the adrenaline draining out of my system. Coffee, black, please. Maria brought it in 30 seconds. Set the cup in front of me with both hands. You need me to call someone? I wrapped my fingers around the ceramic. The heat felt like needles at first, then like mercy. I've got it, thank you. She hovered for a moment, then nodded and walked away. I drank the coffee in small sips, let it burn through me. Felt my body remember what warmth was. My phone sat in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, battery at 37%. Good enough. I pulled up Samuel's number. The emergency line he'd given me 36 years ago when we drafted the original trust. For emergencies only, he'd said. Day or night, this counted. He answered on the second ring. Henry. His voice was alert. No sleep in it, even at 4 in the afternoon. I've been waiting for this call. They locked me out. Changed the locks while I was at chemo. Filed a forged power of attorney this morning. Silence on the line. Then Samuel said, "Where are you now?" "Diner on Armitage, near the house." "Get in a cab. Come to my office. I'll have the whiskey ready. I need the trust documents. Everything. The original. The amendments. Maggie's provisions. Henry." Samuel's voice carried something I hadn't heard in years. He leaned forward, I could tell, fingers probably tapping the folder. "I've had copies ready since Margaret's funeral. I've been waiting for them to make a move." I closed my eyes. 36 years of friendship, of preparation, of trusting that the documents would hold when everything else failed. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Take your time." Samuel paused. "But Henry, don't answer the phone when he starts calling." "Let him sweat." I hung up. Paid for my coffee with a $5 bill. Told Maria to keep the change. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clearing. Stars would be visible tonight from my observatory. The same stars my grandfather watched from Galway. I wouldn't be there to see them. Not tonight. I flagged the cab on Armitage. Climbed into the warm back seat. Gave the driver Samuel's address in the West Loop. My phone buzzed. Derek's number. I let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again 30 seconds later. I turned the phone face down on the seat. The cab moved through traffic. Past the Brownstone. Past the fence I'd forged. Past the life I'd built with my own hands. My phone kept buzzing. 2 calls. 5. 8. I watched the numbers tick up on the screen and felt nothing. Samuel's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building I'd developed in 1989. Red brick. Exposed ductwork. The kind of renovation that had seemed risky 35 years ago and now sold for millions. He met me at the door. 68 years old, white hair, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. In his hand, a tumbler of Jameson. "You look like hell." "I feel worse." The office was warm. Real warmth, not diner warmth. Samuel's assistant had gone home hours ago. The conference room lights were on, and the table held stacks of documents organized with colored tabs. "I've got everything." Samuel led me inside. The original trust, the 94 amendments, the provisions Maggie added after her diagnosis. I stopped in the doorway. "Maggie added provisions. She didn't tell you?" I shook my head. Samuel set the whiskey on the table, pulled out a chair for me. "She came to see me about 18 months ago, right after the diagnosis. She wanted to add some failsafes of her own. Things that would activate only under certain conditions." "What conditions?" Samuel handed me a document. At the top, in Maggie's handwriting, "To be opened only if." I read the conditions. Removal from primary residence without consent. Evidence of financial exploitation. Any attempt to declare Henry incompetent without proper medical evaluation. She knew. She suspected. Samuel sat down across from me. Margaret was smarter than both of us combined. Henry. She saw what Derek was becoming. She saw Vanessa's influence. She prepared. I set down the document. My hands had stopped shaking. "What's in her provisions?" "Evidence, mostly. Account numbers Derek doesn't know about. Insurance policies with you as sole beneficiary. Documentation of every dollar she tracked Derek, taking from the company over the past 5 years." 5 years? Samuel nodded. "She was watching. Long before you were. And she left you a letter." He slid an envelope across the table. Maggie's handwriting on the front, "For Henry, when the time comes." I didn't open it. Not yet. I couldn't. Not here, not now, when there was work to do. The trust. Section 4. Samuel's jaw set. His eyes narrowed. The look he wore before closing arguments. Section 4, subsection C. He pulled a thick document from the stack, flipped to a tabbed page. Grounds for automatic transfer of all trust assets to contingent beneficiaries. I read the words I'd written 3 decades ago. Physical neglect of the grantor. Financial exploitation. Removal from primary residence without written consent. Derek locked me out. In -15 wind chill. While I was on chemotherapy. That's physical neglect. Potentially attempted murder, given your medical condition. He filed a forged power of attorney. Financial exploitation and fraud. Samuel pointed to another paragraph. And look here. Any attempt to institutionalize the grantor in a facility rated below 3 stars without proper medical necessity constitutes elder abuse under this trust's terms. Lakeside Manor, 2 stars. Derek reserved you a bed there, while I was at chemo. Samuel set down the document. The trust transfers automatically, Henry. To Emma. All of it. The Brownstone, the company shares, the accounts, everything Derek thought he was inheriting skips him entirely and goes to his daughter. My phone buzzed on the table. Derek's number. Call number 14. He found the napkin. What did it say? 2 words. Check trust. Samuel laughed. The sound filled the conference room. He never read it. 30 years that document sat in your filing cabinet, and he never once looked at it. He assumed it was his. They always do. Samuel pulled another stack toward us. Now, let's talk about the forged power of attorney. I know a forensic document examiner who can have an analysis ready by Monday. Your signature has been in court documents for 40 years. Any forgery will stick out like a sore thumb. My phone buzzed again. Number 15. I picked it up. Looked at Derek's name on the screen. Thought about answering. Thought about telling him exactly what was coming. I set the phone back down. Let him sweat, Samuel had said. Good advice. We worked through the evening. Samuel's assistant came back at 6 with sandwiches and more coffee. We mapped the forged POA against Illinois elder abuse statutes. We calculated the gambling debts Derek had accumulated, traced through the cash withdrawals from my accounts. We documented the nursing home reservation, the forged signatures, the systematic campaign to isolate and institutionalize me. By 10 o'clock, we had a case. By 11, we had a strategy. By midnight, Derek had called 49 times. His voicemails evolved over those 8 hours. The first few were angry, demanding, the voice of a man who thought he held all the cards. By call 20, the anger had curdled into confusion. By call 35, confusion had become fear. The 49th voicemail came at 12:07 a.m. Derek's voice shook. Dad, please. What does this mean? The trust. I don't understand. Call me back. We need to talk. Dad, please. I listened to it once. The man who'd locked me out in the cold, begging now. I deleted it. Samuel looked up from his documents. Ready? I thought about my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle. The man who'd locked me out in the cold. Ready. We went back to work. Samuel poured 2 whiskeys and set one in front of me. The conference table stretched between us, the same table where we'd drafted the original trust 30 years ago. My hand still felt the cold from the porch, even though the office radiator hummed and heat seeped back into my fingers. I wondered when you'd finally fight back, Samuel said. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. I've got everything we need. He produced a thick manila folder from the credenza behind him. Callahan Family Trust. Confidential stamped across the front. 30 years had yellowed the edges. Coffee rings marked the cover for meetings I'd forgotten. 94 amendments and the original provisions, reduced to paper and ink. I watched Derek at the reception. Samuel opened the folder and spread documents across the table. After Margaret's funeral, Derek circled the room that day. His eyes kept drifting to the Brownstone's front door, calculating. I knew then. I picked up my whiskey, didn't drink it, just held the glass and felt its weight. He thinks he owns everything, I said. Thinks he's already won. Samuel turned pages until he found a tabbed section. Red tab, section 4. Read this, he said. Subsection C. I pulled the document toward me. My own handwriting filled the margins from 3 decades of amendments and clarifications. But the core language remained unchanged. Grounds for automatic transfer of trust assets to contingent beneficiaries. I read aloud, my voice flat. Physical neglect of the grantor. Financial exploitation. Removal from primary residence without written consent. Samuel nodded. He locked you out in -15 wind chill while you were on chemotherapy. That's physical neglect. Potentially attempted murder given your medical condition. I set down the document. And the contingent beneficiary, Emma. Samuel's jaw set. His fingers pressed white against the folder. Not Derek. Emma, everything he's scheming to steal will skip him entirely and go to his own daughter. The words settled over me. Derek's plan to claim his inheritance had instead guaranteed it would pass to the next generation. His cruelty had written him out of everything. The Brownstone, I said. He thinks it's his. He's been telling people. Samuel pulled another document from the stack, a property deed. My signature at the bottom, witnessed and notarized. Never transferred. Samuel tapped the page. The Brownstone remains in the irrevocable trust. Derek assumed ownership would pass to him automatically. He never bothered to check. I thought about my son standing in my hallway, smirking through a 6-inch gap. This is my house now, old man. Except it wasn't. It had never been. Samuel reached for another folder, this one thinner. The fraudulent power of attorney Derek, filed this morning. I had a clerk pull a copy from the courthouse before they closed. He slid the document across the table. I looked at the signature line. My name, written in blue ink. A passable forgery to someone who didn't know better. Look at the pressure, Samuel said. The way the pen lifted between letters. Your signature flows. This one stops and starts. Even I can see it. I traced my finger over the forged name. 40 years of signing contracts and checks and legal documents. My signature had become as distinctive as a fingerprint. I know someone who can prove this definitively, Samuel said. He picked up his phone. Margaret Chen, best forensic document examiner in the Midwest. Testified in 3 federal fraud cases last year. It's past midnight. She owes me. Samuel dialed. I got her out of a bad lease situation in 2019. The phone rang twice. A woman's voice answered, groggy with sleep. Margaret. Samuel's tone carried the weight of a favor being called. I need an emergency analysis. Signature comparison. Can you come to my office? He listened, then nodded. Yes, tonight. The subject is in imminent danger of elder abuse. I watched him negotiate, his voice calm and professional, even at 1 a.m. This was the network I'd built over 40 years. Not through favors or manipulation, but through doing good work and treating people fairly. Now that network was mobilizing for me. She'll be here in an hour, Samuel said, hanging up. She's bringing her equipment. I nodded. What about the money? Derek's been taking cash from my accounts for months. Samuel pulled out a legal pad. I have an accountant. Martin Reeves, forensic financial analysis. He can trace every dollar your son has touched. I gave Samuel the account numbers, the passwords, the authorizations he needed. Martin Reeves picked up on the 4th ring, and within 10 minutes he was logging into banking portals and credit card statements. This will take time, Samuel said. But by morning, we'll know exactly where the money went. The hours passed in a blur of documents and phone calls. Margaret Chen, the forensic examiner, arrived at 2 in the morning. Gray-streaked hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. Professional, even in sweatpants and a Northwestern hoodie. She spread my known signatures across the conference table. 40 years of samples. Contract closings, property transfers, loan documents. Then she placed Derek's forged power of attorney beside them. Different pen angle. She pointed with a magnifying loupe. Your natural signatures show consistent rightward slant at approximately 15 degrees. This forgery varies between 8 and 20 degrees within the same line. She measured pressure indentations with a device that looked like a dental tool. Your signatures show consistent medium pressure throughout. This one starts heavy, lightens in the middle, then presses harder again, characteristic of someone stopping to check their reference. How certain are you? Margaret looked up from her equipment. I'd stake my license on it. These aren't even close to matching. She photographed everything, took measurements, made notes in a leather-bound journal. By 3 in the morning, she'd produced a preliminary report documenting 12 distinct inconsistencies between my genuine signatures and Derek's forgery. I'll have the full analysis ready by Monday, she said. But this summary should be enough for emergency proceedings. After Margaret left, Samuel's accountant called in with preliminary findings. I've traced the cash withdrawals from the joint account, Martin said through the speakerphone. 15,000 over the past 2 months. But that's just the beginning. He'd found more. Credit card advances. A second mortgage Derek had taken on a property I didn't know he owned. Lines of credit opened and maxed out across 4 different banks. The total exposure, Martin said, $340,000. I sat back in my chair. $340,000. More than some people earned in a decade. Where did it go? Multiple sources, Martin said. Sports betting apps. DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM. I found monthly statements showing consistent losses. He was chasing, doubling down after losses, trying to recover. Samuel shook his head. Classic pattern. About 80,000 went to underground poker games, Martin continued. Cash withdrawals in specific amounts, always on Friday evenings. The locations, match addresses I've cross-referenced with known illegal gambling operations in the western suburbs. I thought about Derek's stress. The tension I'd attributed to business pressure or marital problems. The desperate edge in his voice when he'd asked to borrow $40,000. And the rest? Margin trading, Martin said. He opened a brokerage account last year. Leveraged positions on cryptocurrency and meme stocks. The account shows realized losses of over $100,000. Samuel let out a low breath. He's in deep. There's more. Martin paused. Some of his creditors aren't banks. I found evidence of private loans from individuals. The interest rates suggest these are not legitimate lenders. Loan sharks, I said. Martin confirmed. One of them has been sending collection notices to his home address. Another appears to have photographed his car in your driveway last month. These people are getting impatient. The pieces locked into place. Derek wasn't greedy. He was drowning. The gambling debts were crushing him. The dangerous creditors were circling. My money, my house, my assets were his only escape. I understood now. Not forgiveness, just understanding. My son was drowning, and he'd decided to push me under to save himself. Is that enough for tonight? Samuel asked Martin. I'll have a complete forensic accounting ready by end of day tomorrow. Martin yawned audibly. But yes, you have enough to prove financial exploitation. After the call ended, Samuel sat back in his chair. The whiskey bottle sat empty between us. Outside, the first gray light of dawn pressed against the windows. One more thing, Samuel said. He reached into the credenza and produced a sealed envelope. My hand stopped halfway to the coffee cup. Maggie's handwriting on the front. For Henry, when the time comes. She came to me 18 months ago, Samuel said quietly, right after her diagnosis. She wanted to add provisions of her own. Things that would only activate under certain conditions. I stared at the envelope. My wife's script, familiar as my own heartbeat. One of the conditions, Samuel continued, was any attempt to remove you from the family home. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. The paper felt thin, fragile, like it might dissolve at my touch. "I'll give you a moment," Samuel said. He stood and walked to the window, his back to me. I opened the envelope. Inside, I found account numbers written in Maggie's careful hand. Insurance policies I didn't know existed. Documentation of cash she'd hidden in accounts Derek couldn't access. And a letter. "Henry," it began. "If you're reading this, Derek has done what I always feared he would. I watched him change over the years, watched the entitlement grow, the resentment deepen. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped the boy we raised would find his way back to us. I wasn't wrong. I knew he would try this. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from our own son. I wanted to believe he was still in there somewhere, the little boy who used to help you in the workshop, who cried when he skinned his knee and wanted his mother's kiss to make it better. That boy is gone. Maybe he never existed the way I wanted him to. But I could protect what we built. The accounts listed here hold enough to keep you safe, no matter what Derek does. The insurance policies will pay out regardless of how the will is interpreted. I've documented everything he's taken from the company over the past 5 years, every dollar he thought he was hiding. Use it, Henry. Use it all. Don't feel guilty. Don't hold back out of some misguided love for the man he's become. He stopped being our son the day he started seeing you as an obstacle instead of a father. I love you. I've loved you since that day at St. Michael's, when you looked at me like I was the whole world. 50 years of loving you wasn't enough. I wanted 50 more. Watch the stars for me. Tell Emma about Galway. Yours always, Maggie. I read the letter twice. Tears hit the paper, smearing the ink on her name. Samuel stayed at the window, giving me the space grief required. She knew, I said. My voice cracked. She always knew. Samuel turned back to face me. Margaret was the smartest person in any room she entered. She saw what Derek was becoming long before either of us wanted to admit it. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, held it against my chest for a moment. What now? Samuel returned to the table, all business again. The emotional moment had passed. Now came the strategy. I have a contact in the sheriff's department, Wayne Brennan. He's been serving papers for 30 years. Owes me from a custody case in 2015. Samuel dialed. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. Wayne. Samuel's tone carried authority. I need you for an elder abuse case. Personal service of a restraining order. Fraud investigation notification, and emergency protective order. I listened as Samuel outlined the situation. Deputy Wayne Brennan, my attorney explained after hanging up, had seen enough family disputes to recognize Derek's type immediately. He'd agreed to serve the papers personally, Sunday evening, at a family dinner. Now, Samuel said, we need witnesses, character witnesses, people who know you, know your work, know your reputation. I thought about the men I'd built the West Loop with, the original partners from the 1980s. Men who'd started as union tradesmen and built their fortunes alongside mine. Call Robert Morrison, I said, and James Chen, and Frank DiStefano. Samuel raised an eyebrow. The old guard, they remember when Derek was in diapers. They've watched him coast on my name for 20 years. Samuel made the calls. Each man answered despite the early hour. Each one agreed immediately. No questions about evidence or legal strategy. Just tell me when and where. Frank DeStefano, who'd been my first foreman on the Fulton Street warehouse and had known me for 40 years, said it plainest, that boy's been a disappointment his whole life. Happy to say so, under oath. By 7 in the morning, we'd assembled a coalition. The forensic document examiner had proven forgery. The accountant had traced $340,000 across gambling losses, margin trading, and dangerous debt. Deputy Brennan had agreed to serve the papers. 3 witnesses stood ready to testify about my character and competence. And Maggie, even from beyond the grave, had armed me with accounts and evidence I hadn't known existed. Samuel leaned back in his chair. The conference table was covered in documents, coffee cups, legal pads filled with notes. Dawn light filled the office now, golden and cold. We have everything, Henry. The trust provisions, the forged POA, the financial exploitation, the witnesses. I looked at the evidence spread before me. 40 years of careful planning, activated by 2 words on a crumpled napkin. When? Sunday dinner, Samuel said. The same family gathering where he first called you senile in front of the extended family. Deputy Brennan will be waiting outside. Your witnesses will be present. And Derek will discover that the house he thought he owned was never his to sell. I picked up Maggie's letter, held it for a moment, then placed it in my jacket pocket, close to my heart. She told me to use it all, I said. Every weapon she gave me. Samuel nodded. Then that's what we'll do. I stood from the conference table. My body ached from the night's work, from the chemo, from the cold that still lingered in my bones. But my mind was clear. Clearer than it had been in months. The trap was set, the allies assembled, the evidence documented and verified. All that remained was the confrontation. The lock turned clean. My key, my door, the way it should have been all along. I stepped into my own hallway for the first time in 5 days. 5 days since the lockout. 3 court appearances. 1 emergency motion granted. The Brownstone smelled like furniture polish and old wood and something else I couldn't name. Absence, maybe. The particular emptiness that settles into a house when the people inside have stopped caring about anything but what they can take. Samuel waited on the porch behind me, his breath fogged in the cold evening air. Everything in order? I looked at the hallway I'd built, the crown molding I'd carved myself, the hardwood floors I'd sanded and stained 3 times to get the color right. Getting there. The court order restoring my access had come through Friday afternoon. Emergency motion filed by Samuel, granted within 4 hours once Judge Patterson read the forensic document analysis. Derek and Vanessa had been ordered to vacate the premises by 6 o'clock Saturday evening. They'd complied. They had no choice. Now it was Sunday, 5 o'clock. The dinner guests would arrive in an hour. I moved through the first floor, the formal dining room where Derek had hosted his parties without me, the kitchen where I'd eaten cold leftovers standing at the sink, the living room where Vanessa had rearranged everything I'd built to match her taste rather than Maggie's. The furniture sat where Vanessa had arranged it. The silverware waited in its mahogany box on the sideboard. The china Maggie picked out 40 years ago rested in the cabinet. They'd left behind everything they couldn't sell quickly, everything they'd planned to liquidate after I was gone. A knock at the door. I opened it to find Frank DeStefano on the porch. 72 years old, retired now, but he still carried himself like the foreman who'd taught me half of what I knew about construction. Behind him stood Robert Morrison and James Chen, my original partners from the Fulton Street days. Men who'd watched me build an empire from nothing and watched my son try to steal it. Henry. Frank's handshake was firm. His eyes moved past me into the hallway. Ready for this? I've been ready for 30 years. They filed into the house. Robert and James nodded to me as they passed. We'd spoken on the phone. They knew what was coming. They'd agreed to witness without hesitation. Samuel entered last, carrying his briefcase. Inside it sat the documents that would end my son's schemes. The forensic analysis, the bank records, the trust provisions Derek had never bothered to read. "Where do you want us?" Frank asked. "Dining room." I gestured down the hall. "Same seats you had at Maggie's Christmas dinners." Frank's jaw tightened at the mention of my wife's name. He'd known Maggie almost as long as I had. Watched Derek grow up at company picnics and holiday parties. Watched him become something none of us recognized. They moved toward the dining room. I turned to climb the stairs. Emma's room was on the 3rd floor. The door stood open. She sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, watching me from across the room. "Grandpa." I walked to her. Sat on the edge of the bed. She looked younger than 16 in that moment. Scared in a way no child should be. "How much do you know?" "Enough." Her voice was even, but her hands shook. "I heard them talking. Last night. In the kitchen, before they left. They're in trouble." "Yes. Real trouble. Not just money." "Yes." Emma looked at me with Maggie's eyes. The same quiet intelligence. The same way of seeing past the surface. "What's going to happen?" I took her hand, small fingers wrapped around mine. "Tonight, I'm going to show your father the truth. About the trust. About the documents he forged. About the money he took. And then the police will arrest him." Emma's breath caught. Tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. She didn't wipe them away. "I don't want this. I don't want any of this." Neither did I. We sat together. The house settled around us. Somewhere downstairs, Samuel was arranging documents on the dining room table. Outside, Deputy Wayne Brennan, the lawman Samuel, had recruited through 30 years of mutual favors, parked his cruiser 3 houses down, waiting for the signal. The trap was set. All that remained was for Derek to walk into it. "You're safe," I told Emma. "No matter what happens, you're staying with me." She nodded, squeezed my hand. "Grandpa." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They never cared about me." "Not really. I was just another thing they planned to use." "I know. But you do care about me. I've cared about you since the day you were born." I touched her cheek, same way I cared about your father. "The difference is, you're still worth caring about." Emma pulled me into a hug. Fierce and sudden and desperate. I held her the way I'd held Derek when he was small. Before the entitlement. Before the greed. Before he became someone I didn't recognize. "Come downstairs," I said when she finally pulled back. "Stay close to me." "Okay. We descended together. The business partners had taken their seats at the dining room table. Samuel stood by the sideboard, documents arranged in neat stacks. Everything ready. At 6:15, headlights swept across the front windows. A car door slammed. Then another. I heard Vanessa's voice first. Something about traffic. Then Derek's laugh, too loud, the way he laughed when he was nervous. They climbed the porch steps. The front door opened without knocking. Why would Derek knock? He still thought this was his house. "Dad?" Derek's voice echoed through the hallway. "What's going on? Why are there so many cars outside?" He appeared in the dining room doorway. Vanessa behind him, her hand on his arm. They both wore expressions of careful confusion, the masks they'd perfected over years of pretending. Then Derek saw Frank, Robert, James, men who'd known him since he was a child, men who weren't smiling. "Dad." Derek's voice hardened. "What is this?" "Sunday dinner." I gestured to the empty seats at the table. Derek hesitated. Vanessa's fingers tightened on his arm. "Henry." Vanessa's voice dripped with practiced sweetness. "We weren't expecting company." "No. I imagine you weren't." They sat. Derek chose the seat at the head of the table, the one I'd occupied for 30 years. Habit, entitlement. He didn't notice the document stacks on the sideboard. Didn't notice Samuel standing in the corner with his briefcase. Vanessa's eyes moved from the silver candlesticks to the crystal glasses to the antique sideboard Maggie inherited from her grandmother. Her fingers drummed the table edge. The food came from the kitchen. Simple dishes I'd ordered from a catering service. Derek poured wine without asking if anyone wanted it. Made a toast to the family's future. He raised his glass to moving forward. No one drank except Vanessa. We ate in silence. The business partners chewed without tasting. Emma sat beside me, her fork moving food around her plate. Derek talked about the company, about plans he'd made, about properties he wanted to develop. He spoke as if I were already gone, as if this were a memorial dinner and I was the ghost. Dessert arrived. Apple pie. Maggie's recipe, though Derek didn't recognize it. Before we finish, my voice cut through Derek's monologue. He stopped mid-sentence. I have some documents to share with the family. I reached beside my chair and lifted the manila folder Samuel had prepared. Callahan Family Trust. Confidential, stamped across the front. 30 years of dust and coffee rings and handwritten notes in the margins. Derek's smile flickered. He'd seen that folder in my study 100 times. Never once opened it. Dad, we don't need to do this now. I opened to page 7. Slid the document across the table. Read section 4, subsection C, aloud. My voice carried no request. No room for refusal. The room went silent. Frank leaned forward. Robert and James watched with grim attention. Vanessa's fingers drummed against her wine glass. Derek picked up the document. His hands shook as he scanned the page. Read it, I said. He swallowed. His voice came out thin. Grounds for automatic transfer of trust assets to contingent beneficiaries. He paused, cleared his throat. Physical neglect of the grantor. Financial exploitation. Removal from primary residence without written consent. The words hung in the air. Derek stared at the page, like he expected the text to change. This can't be enforceable. His voice rose. These provisions are 30 years old. You can't just spring this on me now. It's been enforceable for 30 years. I kept my voice level. You just never bothered to check. I reached for the next document. The forensic analysis Margaret Chen had prepared. This is the power of attorney you filed with the court last week. Your signature on the left. My known signatures on the right. Derek's face went gray. Notice the pen pressure, the angle variation, the way the letters stop and start where mine flow continuous. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm saying you forged my signature, and I can prove it. The document landed on the table between us. Derek didn't pick it up. Vanessa leaned over to look, her mask slipping. The next document. Bank records. Cash withdrawals highlighted in yellow. $55,000 over 6 months. From accounts I gave you access to for emergencies. Not for gambling debts. Derek's jaw worked. No sound came out. The next document. A receipt from Lakeside Manor Care Facility. $2,400. Deposit for a bed you reserved in my name. A facility with a 2-star rating and multiple citations for inadequate care. I placed each document on the table. Each one hit the wood. The business partners shook their heads with each page. Vanessa turned on Derek. Her practiced sweetness curdled into something raw. You said you had this handled. Her voice was a hiss. You said the trust didn't matter. You said the documents would hold up. I thought they would. You thought? She stood up from the table. You idiot. You absolute idiot. I gave up everything for this. I let you drag me into this nightmare. And you couldn't even forge a signature properly. Vanessa. Derek reached for her arm. She pulled away. "Don't touch me." The doorbell rang. I nodded once. Samuel pulled out his phone and sent a text. 3 seconds later, the front door opened. Deputy Wayne Brennan stepped into the dining room. 52 years on his face. 28 years of serving papers in his posture. He carried a manila folder of his own. Derek Callahan. Vanessa Callahan. "I'm serving you with notice of formal charges. Elder abuse, fraud, forgery, financial exploitation." He set the documents on the table in front of Derek. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Derek's mouth opened and closed. No words came. "Your phone records from that night have been subpoenaed. Every call documented." I watched my son absorb the words. His shoulders dropped. His hands wouldn't stop moving. He'd shrunk in the chair at the head of my table. The confidence drained from his face. The entitlement collapsed. "Dad." Derek's voice cracked. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this. I was in trouble. I owed people money. I didn't know what else to do." I looked at him. This man who'd been my son. This stranger wearing Derek's face. "Your mother warned me." The words came out flat. Final. I didn't listen soon enough. Deputy Brennan stepped forward. "Mr. Callahan. Mrs. Callahan. You'll need to come with me." Derek stood on shaking legs. Vanessa straightened her jacket, composing herself, already calculating how to minimize the damage. Frank, Robert, and James signed the witness forms Samuel produced. Their signatures validated every document, every charge, every consequence that would follow. Deputy Brennan led Derek and Vanessa toward the front door. They walked past me without speaking, past Emma, who stood pressed against the wall, watching her parents with an expression I recognized. The same expression I'd worn when Michael Brennan emptied my safe and disappeared. The face of someone watching a foundation crack. At the door, Derek turned back one last time. "Dad," his voice was small, "will you ever forgive me?" I looked at my son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle. The man who'd locked me out in the cold. Some wounds don't heal with apologies. Deputy Brennan guided Derek through the door. The police cruiser waited at the curb. Red and blue lights reflected off the snow-covered lawn. Emma moved to my side. Her hand found mine. "What happens now?" I watched the cruiser pull away from the curb. Watched my son disappear into the back seat. Watched 45 years of hope and disappointment drive away into the night. "Now we rebuild." I squeezed her hand, properly this time. The morning after the arrest, Samuel filed the emergency motion to invoke the trust's behavioral transfer provisions. I sat in his office, coffee untouched, watching him work the phone and fax machine with the efficiency of a man who'd been waiting years for this moment. 4 days. That's what it took for a Cook County judge to review the evidence. The forensic document analysis. The bank records showing $340,000 in total exposure. Gambling losses, margin trading, dangerous debt. The reservation receipt from Lakeside Manor. The witness statements from Frank DeStefano and the others who'd watched Derek smirk through that final dinner. The transfer to Emma was granted without a hearing. I received the formal notification on a Wednesday afternoon, hand-delivered by a courier to my Brownstone. The Brownstone deed remained in my name as grantor with lifetime residence rights. The trust provisions I'd written 30 years ago had done exactly what I'd designed them to do. Section 4, subsection C. Derek had never read it. Now, he'd live with the consequences of that oversight for the rest of his life. Samuel filed the motion to reverse any business ownership changes Derek had attempted during what the court documents called my incapacitation period. The legal term felt clinical, distant from the reality of standing on my own porch at -15 wind chill while my son told me to deal with it. The Callahan Development Board met the following Tuesday. Frank DiStefano, Robert Morrison, James Chen, and 2 other original partners I'd worked with since the 1980s. Men who remembered when the West Loop was meatpacking plants and empty warehouses. Men who'd watched Derek coast on my name for 20 years while contributing nothing of value. I didn't attend the meeting. Didn't need to. Frank called me that evening. The vote came down. Unanimous. 30 days to vacate his office. We're having security change. The access code's tomorrow. I thanked him and hung up. Sat in my study, in the chair Vanessa had tried to relocate to the garage. Outside, snow fell past the windows. The same view I'd looked at for 35 years. The phone rang again. Samuel's number. Derek's court-appointed attorney, a man named Whitfield who specialized in white-collar defense, wants to discuss a plea arrangement. They'd rather negotiate than face trial. I listened to the options. The elder abuse charges alone carried 3 to 7 years under Illinois law. Add the financial crimes, the forgery, the fraud. Derek faced serious time. Whitfield proposed 18 months served, 5 years probation. Mandatory restitution of all documented theft, payable over the probation period from whatever employment Derek could secure. I thought about it for 3 days. Part of me wanted the trial. Wanted Derek to sit in that courtroom while witnesses testified to exactly what he'd done. Wanted him to hear Frank describe the dinner where he'd called me senile. Wanted him to watch Margaret Chen explain how amateur his forgery had been. But trials take years. Appeals take longer. I was 67 with cancer. I didn't have time to waste on prolonged revenge. Tell Whitfield, we accept. I want this finished. Samuel nodded. Understood. The Tribune ran the story. The gambling creditors read it the same morning. Local news picked it up. A wealthy developer's son caught trying to steal his dying father's fortune. The coverage named Derek, listed his debts, mentioned the companies that had extended him credit. Within a week, collectors started appearing. I heard about it secondhand. From Frank, who'd heard from someone who knew someone. Derek was staying in a motel on Cicero Avenue while awaiting sentencing. His car got keyed in the parking garage. A single word gouged into the driver's door. Threatening notes appeared under his motel room door. Phone calls came at 3 a.m., heavy breathing and silence. The people he owed money to weren't banks. They didn't use legal methods for collection. They used pressure, fear. The kind of persuasion that leaves bruises in places nobody sees. I set down the phone, poured coffee I wouldn't drink, sat in Maggie's chair until the light changed. Vanessa visited Derek once after the arrest. I know this because Frank's wife saw her car in the motel parking lot. One visit, maybe 30 minutes. She filed for divorce the following week. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, the difference being Derek's sudden lack of assets to exploit. Vanessa had married him for his family's money. Without that money, she had no use for him. Her secret Instagram account surfaced on Chicago's social media. Charlotte Gray. 12,000 followers who thought she was real. Stock images of designer bags from Chanel and Hermes. Vacation destinations she'd never visited. A yacht in Monaco. A villa in Tuscany. A false life built from other people's photographs. The screenshots circulated. People who'd attended her dinner parties, who'd believed her stories about European vacations and exclusive memberships, saw the truth. The fake influencer persona became a punchline at cocktail parties. She would never attend again. The Junior League sent a letter. Membership revoked. Committee positions rescinded. 23 years. 1 week. Vanessa retreated to her mother's apartment in Cicero, the same neighborhood she'd spent her entire adult life trying to escape. The same modest building, the same struggling block, the same reality she'd constructed. An entire false identity to avoid. I felt the weight of watching someone's facade collapse under the pressure of exposure. But not satisfaction. The real estate agent who'd prepared the Brownstone listing learned the ownership documentation was fraudulent. She called Samuel's office, screaming about professional liability and potential criminal charges against herself. She canceled all involvement, threatened her own lawsuit against Derek. Another consequence, rippling outward from his schemes. Derek spent his remaining free days in the motel on Cicero. I imagine him watching television, eating takeout from the vending machines, waiting for the sentencing date. Watching his life dismantle piece by piece through news alerts on his phone. His vintage car poster went with him. The Shelby GT500 he'd dreamed of owning since high school. The car he'd talked about at dinner parties, pretending he was just waiting for the right one to come up at auction. The truth was, he couldn't afford it. Never could. The poster represented every ambition he'd built on assumption rather than effort. The halfway house assignment came through in February. A facility on the south side, shared room, strict curfew, structured rehabilitation for non-violent offenders. Derek reported to serve his sentence, processed like every other offender. His name meaning nothing to the intake officers who'd seen 1,000 men just like him. Men who'd thought they were special. Men who'd learned otherwise. I watched the consequences unfold without gloating. This wasn't revenge. This was surgery. Removing a cancer before it destroyed everything I'd built. The community rallied around me. Casseroles appeared on my doorstep. Old friends called. The real estate old guard closed ranks to protect one of their own. Frank came by twice a week to check on me. Robert sent a bottle of Jameson with a note that said simply, "Glad you're still standing." I accepted the support. Nodded at the right moments. Said thank you when it was expected. But the weight was there. Where relief should have been. I raised this boy, gave him every advantage I never had. Private schools. Tutors. A business degree. A position in my company. Every opportunity to become something worth respecting. I failed somewhere. Made some mistake I couldn't identify. Some moment where I should have done something different, said something different, been something different. Maggie would have known. She would have sat with me in the kitchen the way she used to, coffee growing cold between us, and helped me understand what went wrong. Where the entitlement came from. How the boy who cried when he skinned his knee became the man who locked his father out in the cold. But Maggie was gone. Her grave at Oakwood sat under 2 feet of snow. I visited on Sundays, cleared the headstone, told her about Emma. About the trust transfer. About the consequences unfolding like dominoes falling. I couldn't tell her about the weight. Couldn't admit that justice felt less like victory and more like amputation. Necessary but brutal. The right thing that still left you wounded. The sentencing hearing arrived in late April, 3 months since the arrest. Derek had served his time in the holding facility, awaiting formal judgment. I attended, sat in the back of the courtroom in the same wool coat I'd worn the night he locked me out. Samuel sat beside me, silent, his hand resting on my arm in case I needed steadying. Derek entered through the side door. Orange jumpsuit. Handcuffs. Hair longer than I'd ever seen it. Unkempt, gray showing at the temples I hadn't noticed before. He looked smaller. That was the first thing I noticed. Not just thinner from months of institutional food. Smaller in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. The confidence was gone. The entitlement drained away. What remained was a middle-aged man who'd gambled everything and lost. The judge, a woman named Patterson, who'd granted my emergency motion 4 months earlier, read the charges. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, forgery, fraud. Each word landed in the silent courtroom like stones dropping into still water. Derek's attorney stood when called upon. Made the arguments about first offense, cooperation with authorities, family circumstances. The words washed over me without impact. The judge delivered her ruling. 18 months served. Credit for time awaiting hearing. 5 years supervised probation. Mandatory restitution of $340,000 in documented theft, payable over the probation period from whatever employment Derek could secure. The math was simple. He'd spend the next 5 years paying back money he'd already lost to gambling, working jobs that wouldn't cover his expenses, living in supervised housing, reporting to probation officers, random drug tests, employment verification. Every aspect of his life monitored and controlled. Derek stood for the ruling, faced the judge. His hands trembled at his sides. Then he turned, looked past his attorney, past the bailiffs, past the rows of empty seats. Found me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Father and son across a courtroom. 30 years of history compressed into a single look. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, inadequate for the weight they tried to carry. An apology that couldn't undo standing on a porch in the cold. Couldn't bring back Maggie's years of worry. Couldn't erase the forged signatures, or the nursing home deposit, or the power of attorney filed while I sat in a chair getting poison pumped through my veins. I nodded once, then I stood. Walked past the bailiffs, past the attorneys, past my son in his orange jumpsuit, watching me leave. Some wounds don't heal with apologies. Samuel caught up to me in the hallway. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor. "Henry." I stopped, didn't turn around. "It's over." I looked at the doors leading out of the courthouse. Beyond them, April sunshine. A world that would keep turning, regardless of what happened in that courtroom. "No, it's not over. It's just different." I walked out into the light. Samuel followed. Behind me, the courtroom doors closed on my son, on the life he'd chosen, on every decision that led him to that orange jumpsuit and those inadequate words. I raised him. I failed somewhere. I'd never know exactly where, but Emma was waiting at home. My granddaughter, 16 years old. Maggie's eyes. The trust I'd written 30 years ago had protected her future. That was something. Not satisfaction. Not victory. Just something worth protecting in the wreckage of everything else. The car waited at the curb. I got in. Samuel closed the door. Drive. We pulled away from the courthouse. I didn't look back. If you're feeling my revenge, hit like and drop a rating from 1 to 10 with your thoughts. I appreciate you. The Brownstone settled into stillness I hadn't expected. I sat on the rooftop observatory. The Celestron pointed east, tracking Orion's slow climb above Chicago's glow. April air carried the last bite of winter, the metal of the telescope, cold against my palm. December had brought Dr. Reeves's news. Remission. My joints stopped protesting the stairs somewhere around then. Emma sat beside me, wrapped in the wool blanket Maggie had knitted 15 years ago. 17 now. 18 in August. She'd moved into the Brownstone permanently after Vanessa abandoned custody without a fight. The 3rd floor belonged to her. She'd decorated it with star charts and a photograph of her grandmother at a family gathering, with books about astronomy and architecture, with a copy of David McCullough's biography of the Brooklyn Bridge visible on the shelf by her bed. The nurse, Patricia, came 3 days a week to check my blood pressure and make sure I ate enough. She'd gone home hours ago. The Brownstone held just the two of us. "Right. Grandpa, look." Emma pointed through the telescope's eyepiece. Jupiter hung above the tree line, its 4 largest moons visible as tiny points of light. Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, she recited. Same order as last month. Same order as 400 years ago. Galileo saw them exactly like this. She pulled back from the eyepiece. The cold had pinked her cheeks. Maggie's eyes looked back at me. The same quiet intelligence, the same way of watching before speaking. Tell me about Grandma again. What do you want to know? Everything. Emma pulled the blanket tighter. I want to know everything about her. Dad never talked about her. Mom changed the subject whenever I asked. Orion's belt. 3 stars in a row. Different eyes watching them now. She made the best apple pie in Chicago. That's where I started. Took her 3 years to get the crust right. She kept a notebook of every attempt, every failure, every adjustment. When she finally perfected it, she made 12 pies in one weekend and gave them to every neighbor on the block. The corner of Emma's mouth lifted. What else? She read 3 books a week. Never fiction. She said real life was strange enough without making things up. History, mostly. Biographies. She could tell you everything about Eleanor Roosevelt and Catherine the Great and Marie Curie. Did she like the stars? She tolerated them. I looked at the telescope. She'd come up here with me sometimes when the sky was clear. She'd look through the eyepiece and say something like, "That's very nice, Henry. Now, come to bed." Emma laughed. I hadn't heard her laugh like that in months. We sat. Below us, a car alarm started and stopped. A dog barked twice. The ordinary sounds of a world that kept turning, regardless of courtrooms and consequences. Grandpa. Yes. Why didn't you fight back sooner? She waited. I owed her an answer. Orion's belt. Same 3 stars. Different watchers. Because I needed to know if there was anything left to save. She waited. There wasn't. I turned to face her. Not in your father. Not in the man he'd become. But there was you. Emma's jaw tightened. She looked away. I taught your father to walk. Taught him to ride a bicycle. Taught him to use a level. To read a blueprint. Couldn't teach him to be honest. Some things can't be passed down. But you're teaching me. I'm trying. I reached over and squeezed her hand. You're worth teaching. She squeezed back. Her fingers were cold through the blanket. Same stars, I said. Different night. Emma looked up at Orion. The hunter's belt. Same pattern. Different watchers. Same family. Different chapter. I looked at my granddaughter. This girl who'd inherited her grandmother's perception along with her eyes. This heir who'd received everything her father tried to steal. Patience isn't weakness. That's what I'd learned. It's the foundation you build everything else on. The universe stretches out cold and indifferent, but within it, small acts of loyalty and love still matter. A grandfather teaching constellations. A grandmother leaving provisions. A girl asking questions about a woman she barely knew. The telescope tracked Orion's slow climb. Emma leaned against my shoulder. The brownstone waited below us, warm and quiet, no longer a battlefield. That night, I climbed into bed and didn't wake until sunlight crossed the floor.